Hello and welcome to our limited edition series of the Time, Space, Compassion podcast, brought to you by Suicide Prevention Scotland, the community of people and organisations working together to deliver the Scottish Government and COSLA's suicide prevention strategy. I'm Lawrence Brodie, and over 3 episodes we've been exploring the idea of time, space, compassion in 3 different settings: primary care, unscheduled care, and back in our special episode from Dunfermline Athletics East End Park, in communities. Time, space, compassion is an approach which encourages people and organisations to embed these principles in how they support others at a time of crisis. You can learn more on the Scottish Government website or explore some fantastic practice stories on the Suicide Prevention Scotland Medium blog. You'll find links in the show notes. Today we're bringing these 3 strands together for our final episode, with colleagues from clinical, statutory and community settings meeting up to discuss how time, space, compassion can be embedded in practice. Now, before we start, today's episode will undoubtedly cover themes that some of you may find distressing. You'll find a range of useful links in the show notes, and at the end of the episode I'll give you some key telephone numbers that may be helpful if you are struggling or know someone else who is struggling with their mental health. Finally, it's important to note that the views of our contributors are not necessarily the views of the Scottish Government or COSLA. Right, let's meet our panel. Krish Veeramuthu is a paramedic team leader with NHS Scotland. We are with the Anchor House in Perth, meeting Chief Operational Officer Wendy Given, and down in South Ayrshire, where we have Trauma-Informed Practice Officer with the Council there, Angela Pinkerton.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Krish Veeramuthu. I work with the Scottish Ambulance Service. My role is the mental health paramedic team leader in Glasgow. I've been doing this for a couple of years. We've kind of a well-rounded kind of introduction to the ambulance service. Worked as a call taker and dispatcher before going out on the road. But I would say that this role that I currently do is fascinating, and I really love it. In terms of time, space, compassion, what it means to me, I guess, in my role is, responding to people in mental health crisis in a timely manner. It's quite decent in the sense that we have a dedicated resource for mental health emergency calls. So that's what I do: respond to people, aspects such as self-harm, suicidality, intentional overdose. A lot of these calls would sit in the kind of category 2 emergency calls. We've got a triage system in the Scottish Ambulance Service, so in effect sometimes they could wait a fair bit of time. The target would be an hour, but immediately life-threatening calls can sometimes kind of put these calls down the queue. So these calls are dedicated for my resource, so we can in terms of time, we're getting to the patient in a more timely manner. Space, generally seeing people in their own home. If they had any reservations about that, then we work in conjunction with mental health nurses in Glasgow and the mental health assessment units, and we can offer to see the patients there as well. So sometimes that's kind of more beneficial for the patient if they're more comfortable with it. So yeah, just having that, the most appropriate space for someone to meet us and feel comfortable with us offering so many interventions or helps. That's really good. And compassion, I think it's inherent in the ambulance service. We've got people that want to help, people that want to listen. We care about what we do, so I think that's always been a fundamental factor. But yeah, so it's centered in aspects of empathy, centered in aspects of just wanting to make a difference. And it's in knowing that the person's phoned 999 or came through the 999 system by a friend, another agency, knowing that they're a source of crisis or kind of the worst points of how they're feeling, and we can hopefully offer a compassionate approach to try and assist them. So yeah, it's a brilliant role. I love it, and that would be my answer.
Fantastic. We'll hear more about the Scottish Ambulance Service and your role and how time, space, compassion comes into play there. But let's head to South Ayrshire now and we'll chat to Angie.
Hi there. So my name is Angie Pinkerton and I am the trauma lead for South Ayrshire Council. So my job really involves kind of supporting that national vision of the Scottish Government and NHS Education for Scotland, and implementing trauma responsive systems and services across South Ayrshire. And now also have remit for staff wellbeing, which I think sits really nicely within the work I do, because if we're not looking after our staff, how can we expect them to kind of go on and work under new agendas? There's so many of them coming out at the moment. As for time-space compassion, I really think that because it adopts that whole kind of relationship-based and kind of person-centred approach, again, this, sits so nicely with the work that I'm already doing around trauma. And I really think there's such a natural fit between them that you can't actually kind of do one of them without the other. But moreover than that, I kind of feel like I totally appreciate that it time-space compassion was developed as a kind of approach to dealing with suicidal crisis. But I think working within a local authority, that the actual principles of the approach to be able to offer that time, that space, that compassion actually works across all our various services, from social work to community care, that where if we can try and offer not only our staff but the people that access our service that wee bit of time, space, compassion, I think it has such great benefit in making this transformational change that we're currently trying to work with, as this is how we do it in practice.
And that's really interesting. We'll come back to a couple of the points there, but we know social determinants have a huge impact on risk of suicide, and that of course is about how people interact with other services and support. So a really interesting point there that we should hold on to, and we'll come back in just a moment to. Wendy, you're up in Perth. Hello.
Hi there. I'm Wendy Given, and I'm the Chief Operational Officer for an organisation in Perth. One of my responsibilities is for a service called the Nook. We are a mental health crisis and suicide prevention centre. So we see people right at the point of crisis. Primarily, people will self-refer to us. So, a good proportion of people that use our service are reaching out directly, or they may be brought to us by Police Scotland, Scottish Ambulance Service. And so we, as I say, we're seeing people right in the heart of their crisis. So up at the Nook, we do have time, space, compassion logos in quite a lot of places. I'm sure the Scottish Government will be pleased to know. We have it written up on the walls, and we just kind of try and reinforce it as a value, that people feel that when they come through the door, that is something that's going to be respected. And I think, as Angie spoke a bit about, it is person-centred. It allows people to feel already settled in the space. We were really, really fortunate that, and I keep plugging this, Gleneagles Hotel furnished the Nook. And so therefore, from a trauma-informed perspective, our space is absolutely lovely. So our space has to achieve a lot of things for people, because it can be a holding space, it's a safe space. So the space element of the time-space compassion really, really is important for us. Everybody comments on what a homely atmosphere it is. And so actually, again, a wee bit like what Angie was saying, they all lean into each other, the time, the space, the compassion. One of the things that I really like about what we do at the Nook is we invite people into the space to use it as if it's their own, and thereby, and this is my thing, people can help themselves to a cup of tea. Everybody's offered a wee cup of tea when they first arrive. But more than that, we say to them, this kitchen is your space. Please just go in and do what you need to do or want to do in that space. So every single day, the principles of time, space, compassion is definitely seen in and around the Nook.
That's brilliant, and a lovely example there. Really interesting to have three quite different guests on the podcast today, coming from different experiences. And I suppose one of the things, just sticking with you for a moment, Wendy, that's interesting is that your service more naturally has some time built into it. Perhaps there are points from a paramedic situation where time is of the essence, lots of things are happening, lots of competing demands in that moment, and we know with council services they are incredibly stretched at times. And so thinking about some of the challenges there that Angie was talking about, but you're able to use time perhaps more flexibly. Is that fair? And how does that work?
No, we are. And for me, when I think about the sort of value of time, it's not just about the physicality of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It is about the skills that underlie that in terms of people feeling heard. And I'm sure that was some of the principles that, people were aiming for with this strategy. So when I even think about Chris's role at the Scottish Ambulance Service, I know that for them to go out and actively listen to people, that makes people feel that they've been given time, So for us, it's not about a meter of time, it's about how you interact and how you connect with people.
Now, we've got something special for you in today's episode. Myra Ross is a mother of two, a poet and a retired police officer. She worked for many years with children and young people in care. She is a passionate advocate for creating educational aspiration and opportunity. Now, though, Myra works in NHS Highland as a health improvement specialist. She uses poetry and storytelling to enhance learning about trauma and gender-based violence. In today's episode, we're going to play 2 poems to you, the first of which is called Safety, Choice, Control.
What is trauma? Trauma is something that happens to you, something that you did not have a choice in, something that stole your sense of safety, your ability to choose, your choice. This poem is called Safety, Choice, Control. This happened to me. It was not a choice. I was not consulted, did not have a voice. No sense of safety. I lost all control. No one beside me in the helper role. Trauma, they call it, and this I would say. Respond by replacing what it took away. Let me make choices so I might feel that sense of control that trauma did steal. Ask my opinion. Collaborate. Give me back some control of my fate. If you can do this kindness for me, I may feel as safe as I once used to be.
Chris, tell us what it's like dealing with these crises on the front line.
We have access to, when I work with the nursing kind of side of things, is to people's kind of support streams, their background with if they're open to kind of community mental health teams, addiction services. So we have access to those notes, that background, those care plans, which we wouldn't have had in the ambulance service kind of prior to that being set up. So sometimes we'll spend a little bit more time before we get to the patient's environment, just so that we're aware of what the point of crisis has kind of brought them to, or what the background around that is. When we're in their home, I mean, it's correct when it's not kind of targeted as such in specific amount of time that we spend there. Generally, my resource, if we look at some of the figures, does spend a little bit longer in the patient's home environment than a kind of standard accident and emergency crew would. And the rationale behind that probably is we have, certainly, especially when I'm working alongside a mental health nurse, more pathways open to us so we can put in support, referrals to crisis services, hospital admissions. We could do that as well. The nurses have kind of direct powers to access beds within the mental health hospital. So you're offering more options, but you're just giving the person the space and the time to kind of describe to you what is brought on that kind of sense of crisis.
South Ayrshire, what are the challenges that communities face at this moment, Angie? Give us a flavour of how things are.
Oh gosh, I think one of the biggest things that we hear from our communities when we try to talk about this time-space compassion is that they're not getting, their long waiting lists, they're not getting to see the people they need to see. There is, so on one hand, it's taken really long for them to get seen, and on the other hand, when they do eventually get seen, well, we're still kind of struggling with that person-centred care, and we still go to certain kind of types of support, which often end up being quite time limited. And then, people are feeling like they're not actually getting that time, they're not actually being heard, they're not being seen, and this can cause kind of a lot of issues. So, we have an excellent kind of community-based workers in South Ayrshire, and one of the projects, called Working for Wallacestown, is a collaborative partnership work where all the different services, we've got representatives from fire, from police, from DWP, from housing, from addiction, and so on. They all are actually based kind of in a hub outside a kind of school in a local community, which means that people can actually just walk in the door and say, I'm needing a wee bit of support with housing, I'm needing a wee bit of support, with DWP and filling out a form. And then those people are actually there to sit down with them. It's very, it's a bit like what you were saying, Wendy, it's quite homely. There's sofas instead of tables, there's a kitchen that the community members can just come in and use. And I think having that space, although I understand in a lot of cases we don't have the space and we can make space another way, but having that physical space for people to actually come in, speak to a person that they need to speak to, might not have the problem solved that day, but they always walk out feeling heard. And that makes such a big difference in where they go from then. Because if they come to us and they don't feel heard, they're less likely to come back to us or go to other people for help.
That sounds very like No Wrong Door. Come to the door and we'll help you out.
It absolutely is. We're trying really to follow that across South Ayrshire now, this no wrong door approach, and I would say that we're doing really well at it, but there's still lots of things that we need to work on. But the right people are kind of like working in this and absolutely trying to get these spaces across South Ayrshire. Because although we kind of fall into this habit of talking about a one-stop shop and then thinking it should be one place that everybody goes to, again, that's not sustainable because you would have too many people at the one place. So having these kind of dotted about the whole region has been really helpful for people. And it's, as I say, it's very at the beginning of this journey, but we are already getting positive feedback about people who can actually access that support when they need it, but more so they're gathering details on things like any kind of self-harm or suicide reports or calls to police or violence in the community, and these numbers are all coming down as well. So it's hopeful we're kind of helping this go in the right direction.
The point Angie was making there about systems are a bit of a challenge, and we hear this a lot. What can we do about systems that struggle to put people first? Big question, but a chance for anybody to solve it.
I'm happy to come in because I was actually just thinking, listening to Chris and Angie, how compassionate they both are, and you could certainly hear the passion in what they're doing. And I think, that is it. The time-space compassion isn't just about how we afford people that use our services. It's about how we treat each other, how we work alongside each other. But also it's really, really interesting to come back to years and years ago, we had this belief that people that worked in care did so as out of vocation. And I think for a while there, we kind of felt that we got away from that. But certainly today, listening to Chris and Angie, you could certainly feel that people are coming back to that, as I say, passionate response. So I think that goes some way to challenging some of the difficulties that are there. It's about the people, isn't it?
And I absolutely think that system change is so important, when we're working with people. I know in times of austerity, in times of cuts, especially with working within a local authority, all organisations will be the same. The first instinct to save money is to make cuts and to cut services, to cut staff. But I would actually argue, when we're looking at creating trauma responsive systems, that if we can take that long-term approach, stop thinking financial year to financial year, or stop thinking, for example, in a local authority, administration term to administration term, if we can adopt this idea of the work coming out from the Improvement Service and Scottish Government at the moment about cross-cutting agendas, and start looking at those outcomes that we're trying to achieve for our communities and the people we support, then we will actually make that change.
I think what's quite encouraging as well is, I think there's definitely more efforts in terms of agencies not working in silo. I went to a recent kind of police conference in how to support mental health crisis, and represented there with the Scottish Ambulance Service, Public Health Scotland, RAMH were there. So we're looking at kind of out with the traditional sectors. I think in emergency care, we're okay at working between the Scottish Ambulance Service, Scottish Fire, Police, but kind of ignoring the stuff that goes on in the background, the tertiary care. But yeah, so it's really encouraging to see that a lot of different voices were kind of taken into kind of that factor that police conference that I went to, and it was we spent a lot of time, and the question that you posed there was actually kind of posed to the table: how do we improve the care for mental health crisis? And they talked about a lot of the things that you have, Wendy and Angie, in your regions, having those centres where people can pop in and have support of kind of multi-agency workers. So I think it's definitely a way that we go.
We take a non-clinical approach at the NUC, so we're a peer-led service. So it's really heartening to hear what's happening in the clinical world. And I think we've worked with over 3,000 people in the time that we've been open, which is just over 3 years. And 97% of the people that we see don't need clinical intervention, so they don't need to be with community mental health teams. What's happening is people are getting into everyday stressful situations, so it's relationship breakdowns, financial problems, losing employment, and just day-to-day life challenges that present the crises to people. And so it's really good to hear you saying about the relationship with third sector, because a lot of that sits with us. Because what we find is that statutory provision work on the legal framework of what they have to provide, what the duty of care is, what's a legal requirement to provide, and then out in the third sector, we kind of fill in the other bits and pieces of the gaps, and it really it kind of works really well. We're undergoing a review at our community mental health services in Perth and Kinross at the moment, and I'm really pleased to say that we're playing quite a crucial part in looking at what that's going to look like, right from a primary care aspect right through to the crisis support that people need. So yeah, for us it's really good to hear the clinical side working so well.
I would totally agree with that, Wendy, because I think I watch our, for example, looking at our social workers as opposed to the kind of voluntary sector workers that we have that work alongside us. And there's a particular organisation that supports people with suicide, supports people coming through addiction and in recovery. And they work with people for as long as they need them. That can be years, that can be however long. They see them at a time that suits them within reason, but they also don't have the amount of paperwork that we often find in statutory services. So that affords them straight away so much more time to be able to give to people.
The beginning of an abusive relationship is a whirlwind of love, affection, and attention. This is followed often by insults, isolation, manipulation, and intimidation. It progresses to an existence of being controlled by many methods, sometimes including violence. This control creates the walls of the relationship that, like glass, are not visible to you or others until you attempt to breach their boundaries. In many ways akin to a spider caught in a glass. This poem is called how are you? I wish someone would ask me, how are you today? And gift me enough silence to find the words to say. I'm frightened, I'm exhausted, I don't think I want to stay. But he says he'll tell the social that they'll take my kids away. And he tells me how he loves me and it won't happen anymore. And I tell the neighbours how I've walked into a door. And he tells me I enrage him, that these things I make him do. And I wish someone would please ask me, but really, how are you? I wish they would not judge me, that they would not tell a soul, that they'd take the time it takes for my story to unfold. I wish someone would come save me, crack the glass and break right in. Set this silly little spider free and safe again.
So let's think a little bit about social determinants and talk to something that Angie was explaining earlier on about the fact that people in South Ayrshire, as they will in communities all across the country, come into contact with public services, every day, every week, every month, every year. And many of those contacts will relate to moments of potential crisis. How do we embed time-space compassion away from specific mental health services, if you like, and into everyday practice?
That's something I'm really passionate about, because although I work really closely with our suicide prevention team, I feel, as I said at the beginning, that all our services, need to understand these principles and be able to deliver them in practice. So the example we always use in training is that somebody who just picks up the phone to make an appointment, to receive that call and organise the appointment, we often refer to kind of our admin team as the gatekeepers of our organisation. So if somebody's phoning up and they've had a really kind of crisis has hit, again, they don't actually care who they're talking to. They're just wanting to talk to somebody, get how they're feeling, get that help out there. And if somebody isn't willing to kind of take that time, space, compassion with them, then they're less likely to, as I said previously, engage with our services. So we actually, although I'm one of the time, space, compassion trainers for South Ayrshire, I have also incorporated it into our trauma training. And we have a slide where we talk about it, and it's about how does this work in practice and how do we do that. And it really allows everybody within their own service, because I'm not an expert in everybody's service, but it allows them to actually use almost this space for reflection, to be able to go, okay, right, so for example, our adult support protection colleagues, they struggled with it the most because they have certain trigger points where they have to, do visits or make reports or feed things up the way. So they were finding this idea of time really kind of difficult to get around, because they were thinking in terms of time, but they stepped out of that and they were able to look at that more from a kind of metaphorical point of view of the way you're speaking to people, the way you're engaging with them, your body language, how you're speaking with them, what you're kind of using that time for, and making sure that it is valid. So I think it's key that all levels across all organisations use this as a kind of engagement tool with people, because if we can offer that time, space and compassion, I think it's that early intervention and prevention and all these crises that happen that Wendy spoke about. If these are not dealt with at the time, they will turn into something that could ultimately end up being a mental health concern. That, this is why we need to get more effective at dealing with, stop it rolling into something else.
And is this about training and induction when new staff take up posts? How do you disseminate that culture?
It absolutely is. I think it's lots of things, and we say this with any kind of change. You need to be looking at your recruitment and your interviewing. You need to be looking at your induction packages. You need to look at the training that staff have access to. But workplace culture is a really big part of this. And we do have a lot of people that even think right now that staff wellbeing shouldn't be a focus, because you're coming to work and you should be doing your work and you shouldn't be kind of thinking about all these things. That's all the self-care that you should be doing at home. So there are a lot of people that think that, it's person in, person out, and, we need to look at outcomes and we need to look at budgets and all these different things. So workplace culture is the really hard thing, and we all talk about that, bringing your hearts and minds along. And that's why I think the training is really important. However, I believe that training alone cannot make a transformational change, and you really need to bring those hearts and minds along with you. So it's allowing that time-space compassion for staff, improving your feedback, making sure that staff voice is being heard, encouraging those principles of co-design and co-production, and making sure that staff feel that within their work experience. Because if it's that model in the model, if they can't feel it, how can they then give it out, and how can they see the benefit of it if they don't feel that benefit themselves as well?
In terms of kind of education and training for fundamental kind of principles of time-space compassion, I think there's some promising things within ourselves, or our clinical effectiveness to actually work with the new paramedic students within Scotland who are undertaking their training, just to kind of reinforce the principles of trauma-informed, of time-space compassion, how that would apply to their clinical practice, and how those processes apply to themselves as well. So I think education is very important, but educating people before they actually join their organisation is a really important aspect. I know as well, I've worked as a call taker, I've worked as a dispatcher before I went out on the road, and sometimes the control room staff get, the training and education for them is maybe kind of not considered in supporting mental health crisis. So again, I know the Samaritans did some work with the call takers just around supporting people in crisis and supporting themselves, and kind of how to reflect on those calls. And a lot of the times when you phone 999, I don't know if you know, but it's kind of scripted. However, for mental health emergencies, there's maybe 3 or 4 questions you ask, and then you're kind of filling in the blanks yourself. So I think that aspect of just giving people a little bit more confidence around kind of, how to support these principles and support the person that needs that support, but while supporting themselves is fundamental in practice. So again, I think you're right. It's looking at lots of different kind of aspects, not just money. And Scottish Ambulance Service is all it's all kind of time-based things. We look at how quickly you got to the call, how long that person waited, X and Y, but not the overall recovery for someone. But again, I do truly believe that that's getting better as the organisation becomes a little bit more educated.
And I think what you were saying there, Krish, about that, kind of values changing and understanding that these things are we're moving towards these things. I think one way is even just if we're taking that values-based approach, that people would want to work with an organisation because the values align. And those values are things like, obviously for me, trauma-informed, and for time-space compassion. And appreciating that this is the organisation you're working with, so your values should kind of align is, I think, also a kind of way forward for that.
Can I just say that it was really quite ingenious that the Scottish Government, and I don't know who came up with the graphics, but I liked the love heart and the time-space compassion logo, because I think that just brings some humanity to it. And instead of there being a corporate logo, or, I've been part of making documents where people have said, oh, you can't put love hearts and things. I'm like, why no? If we're talking about caring for people, it kind of does come into it. So whenever I see any presentations with time-space compassion, or even when Linda came up to Perth to one of our conferences to deliver on it, and you see this big love heart on, you feel embraced, you feel that it's a value, and that there's care and compassion there, just purely because there's a red love heart in the room.
Coming to the end of our conversation, I want to ask each of you to take a metaphorical post-it note and to tell us one thing that you would have as a hope for time-space compassion going forward, something that might be seen nationally, locally, with colleagues, even yourself, but something about the future of time-space compassion.
I just hope that we see it for a lot more years to come, and that there's more of a compassionate response to come for everybody.
Yeah, I would second that. I think I would like to see it embedded into culture where it's not so much an approach that we're working to and a kind of framework of guidelines we're following, but it actually becomes that endemic in people because we understand the value, and that's kind of where the training comes. We understand the value of offering time, space, compassion to people. We have loads of staff already that do it really naturally, but quite often our systems then get in the way of that happening. So I would like to see that as part of the system, and understood that by taking this early intervention and prevention approach, by taking that view that, instead of standing at the river and fishing people out, we're actually going to swim up and see what it is that makes them fall in the first place, that this would then just be part of that value based in that culture within organisations.
Yeah, and I think, I'm going to focus on the compassion aspect. I think it's inherent and it's inherent within the Scottish Ambulance Service, and it's just building upon how we could, maintain and retain that compassion of our staff. So it might be, just that collaborative working, looking at fundamentals of education, how we support our staff to support themselves and the person that they are supporting. So I think for me, I think the ethos of compassion is what I'll pin and post-it notes and boards across the country, and think about that aspect when I'm delivering care to people, delivering education to my colleagues, and trying to obtain that support myself.
I'd like to add one more thing, actually, that I think, although we're in times of austerity, times of cuts, I think that having these spaces, like I discussed that we have our working in Wallstown and our recovery air hubs, having these physical spaces is important. Being within communities, in fact, I think Wendy said it earlier about being with a person where they are, where they need you to be, rather than, us constantly having people come to us. I think we need to get better at working differently within other people's spaces rather than expecting them always to come to ours, because that then creates that whole kind of power kind of differential.
My enormous thanks to Krish Veeramuthu, Wendy Given and Angela Pinkerton for joining us for today's conversation. Really fascinating to hear from all of you. And thank you to you for listening to this latest Time, Space, Compassion podcast from Suicide Prevention Scotland. If you or someone you know is struggling with their mental health or are feeling suicidal, please do not hesitate to ask for help. You can contact your GP or NHS 24 on 111. The Samaritans are available on 116 123, or you can call Breathing Space on 0800 838587. All of those details are in the show notes. From all of us, take care.